warm welcome to this seventh session of the Chairperson Masterclass series for 2023. It happens to be the last session for the year. Hopefully we'll continue again next year, but I'd like to extend on behalf of Climate Governance Malaysia a very, very warm welcome to you this morning. As always, at events like this, it's always appropriate to recognize your supporters. We're extremely grateful to the Securities Commission for providing the venue today as well. We're also grateful to the FIDE Forum, Bursa Malaysia, IOI Properties, as well as ICDM for all their support. Ladies and gentlemen, as we know, the reporting and disclosure burden on corporations continues to increase in light of the demands for more transparency on all aspects of sustainability, notably, of course, the economic aspect, the environmental, as well as the social. And what we find is that the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or the TCFD, has found itself being put in as a component in many of the reporting platforms that are out there. And as we see convergence under the ISSB platform, we see that standards also are beginning to move in this direction. We're very fortunate this morning to have with us Ms. Arina. She is a partner at Ernst for Climate Change and Sustainability, and she has actually very kindly made the presentation that she's making available to you. Are we able to put the?
Yep.
Okay.
We'll stand up. No worries.
Yeah. We'll so you can follow along. We'll try to get it sent out to you so that you can follow along. And if there are any questions, you can please feel free to ask them. Now, in that vein, there is, as you are sitting under the armrest beside you, either the left or the right side, a cable you will see attached to a microphone like this. Ms. Arina is happy to take questions at any point in her presentation. Do fish this microphone out, keep it handy, and to speak, you merely need to press the button at the top, which turns the ring light red, just like this. All right? There should probably be a safety announcement of some kind in a hall, as is usually the case, but just kindly note that there are two exits at the top and one exit on the lower left at the bottom. If for any reason you hear an alarm of any kind, kindly, calmly proceed to the exits. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to turn the floor over to Ms. Arina. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Gary. All right, so thank you very much. A very good morning. So first and foremost, I think, thank you very much for taking your time. We actually have the QR code to the slides for today. What would be useful is for you to scan the QR code and have the presentation slides ready with you on hand. So as we go along, if you're not able to see it clearly, apologies, you can actually refer to your slides on your hand or your laptop. So I think that will be most helpful. If you need your password on your tag, there's a small Wi-Fi login, so you can get Wi-Fi to the SC events as well. So that's if you need Wi-Fi. So I'll give everyone a short 2 minutes. Let me know if you are not able to access, and then we will help you. All right? All right. So very good morning to all the distinguished chairpersons, Tan Sri, Dato', and all the honorable chairpersons that we have in corporate Malaysia. So today, this is just a disclaimer caveat. What we intend to do in terms of the focus areas today is really on TCFD. Now, we talked about TCFD in a number of discussions before, but today what we're going to do is go deep dive into the realms of TCFD. So who we have today, aside from myself, I lead the Malaysia Climate Change and Sustainability Services team in EY. We do have the team, and I have my director, Chetna, Senior Manager Moteng, Jasjit and William here to support. If you have anything that you need, just reach out to them. They're here. So what we want to cover today is these 6 areas. We're going to talk about introduction to TCFD. Then we're going to look at the focus areas of the pillars. First is on governance. Second is on strategy. Third is on risk management. Then we're going to look at matrix and targets. So these are the 4 areas that is most important. And last, we'll have a closing remarks by Dr. Gary. Now, the important thing of this, the key takeaway or the objective of today's session is really to understand what are the potential impacts of climate change on businesses. What are the importance when it comes to link to financial disclosures? Second is to understand the elements of the climate-related financial disclosures and what are the characteristics of good practices. Often we hear board will ask a question, how does good looks like? And more importantly is they say, are we over-disclosing or are we disclosing sufficiently so that stakeholders are not pulling out from the organization? So it's a balancing between of both. Now we will go into deep dive to look what good looks like, and then we're happy to take any questions as we go through. The third one is also from the role of having the oversight of management. It's also important to understand that this is a transformation that most businesses are going through. So what they need is management need to put in place all the various aspects of TCFD. No difference from what you see for IFRS or MFRS 9. Now, what board needs to then understand is to support and navigate when they do the board oversight role. So it's important to understand what are the potential steps to take on when we go through this transformation or adoption of TCFD. So when we talk about introduction to TCFD, the first part is everyone's fully familiar, but a recap of what we need to understand is under the different key scenarios, there will be quite a number of significant impacts. And these are not just scientific research, but what we are also facing on the ground over the past 1 to 2 years. So if we look at the trajectory of climate change, these are the typical 3 that most organizations or businesses need to be mindful of. We have the 1.5 degrees, we have the 2 degrees, and at 4 degrees, what will happen? So at 1.5 degrees, in a very layman, is where there will be very stringent policies. We'll see carbon taxonomy kicking in because all jurisdictions or those who have signed Paris Accord will put on the policies to make sure that we limit the temperature increase to not more than 1.5 degrees. So you will see the similar of having carbon taxonomy like emission trading schemes, or carbon tax like in Singapore, implemented back in 2019, whereby it's $5 per ton. It will increase over time to $30 per ton in the next 3 to 5 years as well. Now, on top of that, for 1.5 degrees, you will also see things like ban on ICE vehicle. Now, we hear a lot about UK or Europe, backsliding when it comes to their policy. But they are still going to go ahead from a jurisdiction standpoint for globally, for most organizations to start looking at transitioning to more EVs and less of ICE vehicle. So that's going to happen when you look at 1.5 degrees. Now, if that doesn't happen and all these policies are not put through and not legislated, we will hit towards the extreme, which is at 4 degrees. So what we see 4 degrees is temperature go up. Every degrees of temperature go up, we have things like climate disasters and more importantly, food security. So those that will suffer are those who are in the food security. So we will actually face that consequences at 4 degrees. Even for every one of us facing an increase of heat in Malaysia weather, we can almost imagine the impact for foreign worker in property and construction. So all these are going to be the implications when we look at different degrees and scenarios. So if in today's days of age, when we look at science, we also look at how is it being evaluated. So climate change is a systemic risk. It's not a risk of just feel and that's how we think about it. So if we look at the statistics, you will see that under the CRO Forum 2019, there is also various research that outline under the different, if we are able to limit, or the green one, which is below 2 degrees scenario, we will see that under different physical risk impact, there will be a range of what will happen. So these are actually systemic risk analysis. So you will see that between the 2 degrees to 3 degrees to 5 degrees, there are different, for example, coastal assets to defend. So there will be consequences when it comes to, for example, the frequency of extreme rainfall, as well as the increase in wildfire and the people facing extreme heat waves. So under that, when we talk about the implication to health, there is also the land area hospitable to malaria. So a lot of us, face these diseases at some point of time, but all these are also consequences to different temperature changes. So when it comes to the economic impact, the one commonly connected to is the global GDP, stranded assets, which all board members are familiar with in terms of the discussion of stranded assets. They will see that under below 2 degrees, there will be the transition of fossil fuels. So we hear about, coal plants, we hear about supply power, transport, and industry. Towards the greener side below 2 degrees, that's where the discussion of stranded assets will come in. And towards, if that doesn't happen, going towards the 5 degrees, the implication will be on the physical risks, uninhabitable zones, agriculture, water-intense industry, and loss of tourism. So when we look at now what all this means is food supply and also insurance opportunities. So these are actually the consequences. And on the right-hand side, what we want to outline is these are the statistics affected by climate hazards. So including concerning the population, water stress, riverine and coastal flooding, drought, and heat as well. So if we look at the magnitude, the next part is we want to talk about when it comes to the investors' lens, what are investors looking at? Now we've faced the COVID-19 situation. This is also the way investors are also looking in terms of performance and profitability of organizations. So what we are seeing investors today, and this is based on our EY6 Global Institutional Investor Survey. So we do an annual survey for all the institutional investors, and we hear from them that 99% of all investors utilizes ESG disclosure as part of their investment decision making, and including 74% who uses rigorous and structured approach. Now in Malaysia, we do have feedback from corporates that say that there are international banks that is starting to get organizations to quickly repay loan so that the international bank can start to exit from some sectors. Whereas for the local banks, they are putting in the next 6 to 12 months, they have put in the negative screening like ESG, but they are adding on the climate risks from a transition risk and physical risk standpoint. So out of quite a number of 34 financial institutions, quite a number of the large ones, or at least the top 5, has started to put in place what a finance emission looks like, what are the 6 sectors, and recently last week, one bank also announced what their trajectory in terms of limiting or at least guiding what their investment direction is or their lending in certain sectors will look like. So that's what we are thinking about when it comes to navigating capital and financial flow from those organizations that doesn't have strategy and move towards those with clear transition strategy. So the 73% is also close to 3/4 say that organizations have largely failed to create more enhanced reporting, and this includes not just financial and ESG, but what's critical is in the decision making, helping investors to make decisions. So what are the key things or the gaps, and what are the way that they are assessing companies? The bottom one is a key one, whether executive compensation is tied to ESG performance. Now we hear in Malaysia, a number of the investors, local and foreign investors, are putting out a certain form of shareholder activism framework. Now, on top of just navigating capital, they are also deciding whether they're going to vote the board of members of directors out if ESG performance is not met. Now, we've seen that before under those that were exposed to some of the labor or at least some of the controversials that we see in Malaysia or in the region. So the next part is, so they want to know not just executive compensation, they also want to know whether the board has direct oversight of ESG performance or the report card. And the next one is extensive of how this is driving performance, and also what are the assurance to international standard, ensuring that the report card is of a certain level of quality. So the conversation of assurance has started in the discussion as well. For those who are preparing for financial statement for public listed company by end of this year, assurance statement is a must. So that is also within the board's oversight already. And the last one is whether the key ESG team members, such as Chief Sustainability Officer, whether do they report directly to CEO and executive team. Now those are going down to the nitty-gritty of how serious is the organization taking this journey. So if we go on to the next slide, just to give everyone a view why this is also important, I won't go through this in detail, but it gives you a view for Malaysia. We've always taken corporate governance in a very strong manner. It all started, when it comes to sustainability, it all started back in way before which is 2015. But here we've outlined in 2015, Bursa have introduced sustainability reporting for all public listed company. Now fast forward, even 2017, the MCCG corporate governance have also been introduced. And then over the years, you can see Bank Negara have also put out further set up the Joint Committee on Climate Change since 2019, and they have also published even more enhanced regulation such as the Climate Change and Principle-Based Taxonomy, navigating whether every financing activity has adaptation, mitigation, or nothing. So they are starting to make sure FIs are already segmenting all their activities and rallying towards adaptation and mitigation. So we are seeing for 2023, on the far left of the slide, whereby the Malaysia's budget, including where our government is heading towards, have also introduced green initiatives such as GITA and GITE. And there are also allocation of 2 billion where we are going towards SMEs. So understanding that the bedrock of organization, we have over millions of SMEs in the micro SMEs. This is where the direction of regulators are going towards. And Khazanah, 6 billion for Dana Impact. GTFS, guarantees of 3 billion. And Malaysia has launched the NETR, as well as MITI has launched NIMP, National Industrial Trade Master Plan, as well as ISSB. Now what we are seeing that will come is the implementation of ISSB, convergence of all sustainability standards under one roof, and that is actually going to be announced once all the regulators come to a consensus on the implementation timeframe for Malaysia. And last but not least is Bursa, over last month, have also provided a very important critical document, which is the Illustrative Sustainability Reporting Guide. Now this guide already have elements of ISSB. So to a certain extent, organization, whether you are main market, ACE market, or you are smaller companies, you can start to use this as a reference report to prepare a sustainability report and also what the performance table looks like for investors to focus. So if we look at this part, why we are doing all this, importantly, looking at what global direction is, we like to always quote where Michael Bloomberg has also mentioned that the increasing transparency makes markets more efficient and economies more stable and resilient. Now, where else what we see Mark Carney, the former chair of Financial Stability Board, whereby they talk about if we have better information, we can build a virtuous cycle to understand what are tomorrow's risks, pricing, better decision for policymakers, and a smooth transition. Now, even today, we know that to get information within the organization is already painful. We are also seeing to answer various stakeholders' requests on information is also painful. So that's why all these is to make sure that there is a certain level of efficiency when we are tackling a not so simple direction. So when it comes to TCFD, why do we actually emphasize on this? TCFD is actually a task force. It's a principle-based driven, whereby a task force was formed, whereby they came together and look at not just climate, but financial disclosure. Now, if you just look at climate, you will look at some of these temperature rise. But if you think about how these connect to financial, that's where the value of TCFD lies. So if we look at the important why is it started in 2015, whereby they gather a few engineers, accountants, scientists, and come together and say, what should we do? when it comes to putting out some of these hard to address sectors and disclosure. So why this is important is to look at what are the forefront and the minds of investor regulators and other users of corporate reporting. So these will actually drive a transformation of corporate reporting. Historically, we always have 5 years financial performance, we always have historical 3 years, but moving forward, the ESG, or at least the TCFD, will drive a more forward-thinking disclosure. So if we look at the convergence, one thing to note is it helps to reframe the mindset of all the readers of corporate reports. Now, what we are seeing is since September 2020, the convergence of standards have started, whereby they have also pulled together not just integrated report, SASB, there's convergence towards value reporting framework, and where moving forward, they have also brought in the CDSB, as well as by June 2023, they have welcomed the completion of the TCFD and the transfer of monitoring into ISSB. So as long as you are on TCFD, you are almost about half on the journey towards ISSB, S1, especially S2. So for board is, if you were to oversee some of these standards, if you're familiar with TCFD, ISSB S2 will not be as painful. But you will still need a step up when it comes to what you have on TCFD. So there is a step up plan on that. So why TCFD is important? If you look at the statistics on TCFD 2023 status report, it is gaining traction in the world. So on the right-hand side, you can see since 2019, there is an increase of financial institutions in the gray, as well as the other TCFD supporters, 410% over the span of 4 years. And you can see that this covers, at this point, 160 trillion of the market coverage. So if you are not within this, then you will be out of this market coverage. So that's the 2 points that we wanted to mention. If we look at Asia Pacific, it's 51%. So we are in a market that is already looking at this fairly, maybe 50%, 50 of the large ones are already quite familiar with TCFD. So if we look at under the TCFD, what are the core elements of this framework? It has the outer ring, the gray one, which is governance, whereby it talks about how you govern. Second is the strategy. What are the actual potential impact of climate risks and opportunities on the organization's business strategy and financial planning? Now, most organizations will be quite good in the start on identifying the risks, physical and transition, but not so good in what does it mean to strategy, and almost not much on what does it mean on financial planning. How to know you have or don't have? If you understand what's the value at risk to your portfolio, that's the end game that you want to get, the number. And under the risk management, again, it looks at what are the processes used by the organization to identify, assess, and manage climate-related risks. What's the question to ask? If the risks in the management have the ERM, Enterprise Risk Management, and if it does cover some of this, and if they provide you certain indicators of not just the risks under climate, but they also share with you what are the likelihood, severity, and impact of all these risks, then you know that the organization has started. Quite a number are still on the journey on this area. And the last one is, once you have gone through that, is the report card, the matrix and the target. So if you think about the matrix and the targets, a lot will start with having scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, or baselining. But what they want to know is, the next step is really to think about, if I were to go on my business as usual, or if I were to expand, will my emissions go up in the next 3 to 5 years? 10%, 20%, 30%. Now, if a $5 carbon tax comes in, what's the percentage to my value at risk? Now, those are the questions when it comes to matrix and targets. So, in terms of how to look at breaking down to the next level, climate-related issues, under the risk, if there is a way to look at it, is transition physical risk. So, under transition, there is the policy and legal, technology, market, and reputation. So, for example, if you think about organizations that have been developing or manufacturing ICE vehicle in Shah Alam, to a certain extent, with the different tipping points when it comes to the price and all, have there been a consideration of market demand drop for ICE vehicles? So those are actually some of the things they need to think about, and whether do they have any potential asset or stranded assets of the factory that's manufacturing ICE vehicle, especially when there are more and more EV manufacturers or assemblers that comes into Malaysia. So those are things that you can think of. Market and reputation. For physical risk, it's acute and chronic. So for example, in the last 12 months, the flood that has happened in Johor, Shah Alam, what are the restoration or value at risk to restore some of these flood risks? And in the next future, they will ask is, what are your analysis in the next 5 to 10 years? How many times flood will happen? What are your insurance coverage? So when it comes to opportunities, this is where once organizations are good at risk management on this, they will look at opportunities almost always in the next year or the same year itself. So they'll think about what are the resource efficiency. The fact that you need to tackle this, they will say that more importantly, if I need to look at technology, if I need to put in automation, how will my automation and data management help me on resource efficiency? And they also think about energy source. So a lot of boards are now saying, after I have my emission baseline, next is, in my reduction plan, what's the maximum RE I can put in? Not thinking about just their business operation emission reduction, but to also think about, if I need to further reduce and prepare, what are the options of green projects or virtual power purchase agreement that are readily available and at what price? So these are the conversations at the board at this point right now. So these are just to give everyone a view what we are thinking about in terms of opportunities. Underneath is, when we look at financial impact, management will need to go down to the devil is in the details. They need to go down to, have there been any present or recent impact when it comes to income statement, cash flow, and balance sheet? So they will ask things like, when it comes to income statement, any of the income are affected or potentially will be affected. So for example, the sectors that are critical, looking at income statement, is the shipping sector. Because of quite a number, they will start to think about, if we were to trade or at least have operations in the likes of Europe and US, they are on the midst of setting some of the location for carbon tax purposes, ETS, as well as whether it's going to be a pass-through mechanism or whether they need to think about availability of carbon credit offsets. So these are actually some of the income statement consideration. Whereas for cash flow statement, the CFOs are now having conversation with banks to say that, now if I have a good report card, on top of just getting a good publicity or rating, I'm also going to get, how can I negotiate better basis point by going for green or sustainable finance? Now that is also something that they are saying, okay, since I have it, I'm going to collect. Those who are in the current today, they will go for green finance. Those who are in the future, they will go for sustainable supply chain financing. On top of just getting basis point, not just basis point for my performance, next is I'll add on further basis point if I am able to rally report card of my supply chain and get my financiers to also give me basis points for my supply chain. So these are actually the two directions of maturity when we think about cash flow and balance sheet management of when it comes to the ESG consideration. So what are the benefits of actually implementing TCFD recommendation? Better access to capital, increasing the confidence and lenders. Now we've gone through the 3-4 years ago, we've seen investor pull out. So the easiest way is why organizations have put out very enhanced disclosure on ESG. It's almost always the number one is investors start pulling out. We've seen investors pull out and share price keep dropping. From 20% of FDI drop to 15%, drop to 10%. That's where the organization have to respond. And to a certain extent, once this is being managed, they will also want to understand what are the opportunities, because they need to now flow capital into where they have to actually break through and to move to the transition. And also to reduce, we've seen a number of climate-related information requests, as well as they are looking at smarter, more efficient allocation of capital. And last is really having a routine consideration of the effects. What is the day-to-day look like at the business ground level? Does the organization understand the importance of emission reduction, for example? Have any organization put in place internal carbon pricing to drive behavior change, operation to operation? What it means is, even before carbon tax hits Malaysia and business, behind the scene, the engine has been set up to drive end-to-end emission reduction for every operation. It can start with the generation before it goes to, for example, distribution, network, retail. So these are the few strategies that organizations have to also start thinking. So if we think about what are the principles for effective disclosure, these are the 7. Not much different from financial reporting. It has to have relevant information, clear balance and understandability, comparable among companies within a sector, industry, or portfolio. Even if you don't put a comparison, the financial or capital players are going to compare you anyway. And then provide on a timely basis, specific and complete, consistent, reliable, verifiable, and objective. So the assurance will actually drive some of these considerations. Now, EY have just last week launched our 2023 Global Climate Risk Barometer, whereby we look at 1,500 companies globally and 100 companies locally in Malaysia. So the ones in yellow were 2020 that we actually study Malaysia's companies. The one in green is 2023 global, including the Malaysia companies. Now what we see here from the global green statistics, everything is quite high in terms of coverage. Everyone's good in ticking boxes already. 90%, 93%, 83%. But when it comes to the quality, see the contrast? Quality is about 50%, 52%, 48%. Targets and matrix, 52%. So globally, that is the landscape that we're seeing. Strategy is the one that scored the lowest. So when it comes to Malaysia, 3 years ago, TCFD was already a study, whereby we see we were at a very nascent stage, and even strategy 3 years ago was only at about 3% people write about a strategy and 1% of quality. So of course, we intend to keep an update and have a look at our Malaysia's PLCs to give a sense check of where this is. So the global one has just been announced. I would encourage you to actually download the report and have a read if you want to understand where the direction is. Now, if we go into, after the introduction, now we deep dive into what to see, what to actually look at in terms of TCFD. The first part is the most popular among all board members, governance. We received so many questions over the past 6 months to 12 months, whereby a lot of board is updating the terms of reference. So this is actually a very popular topic at the moment. What we look at when we think about the introduction to TCFD, these are the 3 when we talk about what are board's oversight. So first is they will go through structural overview. They will look at what are the structure relating to climate change. They will also understand within the board and the committee that was set up, who plays what role. So they will actually look at what are the experience of board members as well, the diversity that you have on the board, who actually have relevant sustainability or operation. I wouldn't call sustainability like a core competency because it cut across, but to a certain extent, the one that has the sustainability must at least understand the nature of the business, what are the critical ESG focus areas within the committee. So they will also ask specifically, because it's TCFD, climate, they will ask who at the board level has climate-specific knowledge. And then when you talk about oversight, they will also ask questions like process or frequency that the board is informed of climate-related issues. Is it one time a year, quarterly, or is it part of some of the more regular engagement? Second is they will ask as well, what are the training received and experience of board members? So training program is something that also quite common. We've heard board wants quarterly briefing or short training or annual training, or they want to be informed of what are the best trainings that board can attend now. And they also want to contextualize what are climate-related issues and how do they promote or at least progress, look at monitoring and progress over the matrix and targets. Now, when it comes to the right-hand side is the most challenging one, incentive structure. how to incentivize board management on climate-related risk. When it comes to the role of management, so that's the board, the three things, and underneath is the management's role. So for management, they have to have a structure, how they report to the board, what are the specific committee or interaction, whether they have a executive steering committee or they actually go through a project steering committee to build this process up first. So the second part is going into the process. Third one is incentive structure. Now here, the next slide is where it's important to distinguish what is baseline and what is the advanced. So this actually comes from the TCFD playbook that EY worked with UNEP FI for banks, financial institutions, but we've adapted it to provide a view of what a basic look like and what an advanced look like. So basic is they will have org chart, they will have key issues, and they will have ESG experience and also climate-related risks and the board compensation, acknowledgement that this is part of the compensation. Now the advanced consideration is some will start to set up a separate committee to report to the board on clear descriptions on role and responsibility. So a lot of popular question is, they will say, do we or should we have a separate climate-related risk or ESG or sustainability committee? So we'll talk about that later, but for here, for advanced consideration, if it is critical, they will set up a separate committee. And the second part is illustrate how this committee roll up into the board and how the board member incentives link to climate incentives. So there's a direct correlation. And the interaction among steering group to facilitate the knowledge sharing. Now when it comes to the right-hand side on management, no different frequency, risk, but where they are showing is also the incentive structure. So you see the commonality between both on advanced is there is a clear remuneration, connectivity, and disclosure. So in the next part is when we talk about the example that we are seeing. If we talk about the example, we actually look at one example sourced from BP. So if we look at BP, the board has oversight. The executive director's remuneration is also tied to emissions reduction performance. The more popular questions that we get is, Arina or EY, what would be a good percentage to put on climate? So we don't have a specific one. You have to go back to your board and your sector. But for BP, if you can see, the next slide later we'll share, somewhere here, if you look at the incentive structure, at the bottom here in your slide, you will see performance measure for incentive, plans commence 2021, 15% of safety, 15% of environment, 20% on operational performance, and 50% on financial performance. So the more common question is 5 to 10% enough to go back to your sector and consideration. All right, and even underneath here, when they allocate this, they put specifically what are the performance indicator. So underneath is tier 1 out of 2 process safety. Here is, they talk about sustainable emission reduction. So there is a measurable number that they have to monitor. So if we go on to the next part, I'll pause here to see if there's any question. Otherwise, we've just completed governance. Okay? If not, yes. Morning.
TCFD reporting and sustainability reporting, are they part of the sustainability statement or is it a separate section on an annual report?
So when it comes to the ISSB, which is the future, they say that it can be in any report as long as you are able to demonstrate the connectivity and linkage. So they ask for you to define where your main corporate report is. Most organizations, they will keep the conciseness within the annual report. And those that actually have more detailed stakeholders to manage, they have a separate sustainability report. Some banks globally have come up with a separate TCFD report because it has become so important for them to look at not just project investing, but portfolio and as well as how they are navigating. So for a bank, they prefer to have a TCFD report by itself. They may see that TCFD report carry more importance and focus now as compared to the broader sustainability report.
Yeah, to add to that, a lot of companies put risk and sustainability in one committee. Is the trend moving to split these into separate committees, the sustainability as a dedicated committee on a board committee, or is it still dovetailing with risk? Because its focus may be diluted if you mix it up with all the risks as well. And there won't be a focus on sustainability. Seeing as that's going to be such an important part of a corporate structure, is that the trend you're seeing now? Is that the recommendation that EY would ask companies to look at?
Yes, so there are a few trade-offs to consider when we have this discussion. And number one is, if the conventional way of putting it under the risk committee, the challenge is we always ask number one, are there sufficient time to deliberate on the risk? And does the risk committee have avenue to look at opportunities, which is business growth? So risk typically doesn't have that unless within their ERM or enterprise risk management, loss of opportunity is also a form of risk in the ERM. Now, if that is not, clearly that sits in business and the main board. So even if it is a role specified to the risk, typically the main board needs to understand risk will only take care of risk and inform what are the considerations. But business growth and opportunities is still at main board. So you are right in a sense, in today's days of age, a lot are struggling to get a committee set up, not because they don't see the importance, they don't have enough people to identify, to navigate the sustainability and risk committee. So they have to think about whether do they want to bring on board someone, that is the first part, or if they are not able to, they will have to leverage based on the optimum that they have now. So we are seeing a number of board, with all these regulations coming, especially for banks, yes, they are creating a sustainability committee, but this is potentially an interim. If you read Bursa's governance, they actually have, when they started sustainability, there was also detailed guideline on how to go about governance. The recommendation back then is no different from set up a sustainability committee structure at the board as an interim to stabilize and implement the process. Once all these are embedded within the business as usual, disband the committee. So there is a transition period within what the needs of business today is versus eventually, once the main board review the financial report card and the ESG report card side by side on a regular basis, you can disband the committee. So, but for now, because it's gaining a lot of traction, what we are seeing is companies like Shell, Sime Plantation and all, they would start to have dedicated, because for them to respond to sustainability is a real time. So they have to actually navigate that. It's similar to crisis management in some respect.
Yeah, in that respect, thanks for the answer. It's very, very constructive. But do you think that boards should look at, you know, say, get a board member who's a specialist in environment or climate change? They don't really exist. This is a black art that's slowly being developed as we go along. I mean, EY probably didn't have a dedicated section to sustainability a few years ago. It's a new part of business. So not all boards can afford another board member or have just a person there just for one particular skill set. We're basically multidisciplined in a board. So do you think that maybe a sustainability committee could actually co-opt an expert to that particular committee over a period of time to help them guide over that particular period while they get their act together? It's all about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. So I think assign specialists to those particular committees might be the way forward. Is that your shared view on this?
Yes, that's why I mentioned today's board, they don't have enough time to get through the papers and all, unless they have a dedicated optimum model whereby they put aside 3-4 hours to discuss on a periodic basis. Even that is also challenging for the board members. So definitely, it's important to ensure management already hire the right thought process. So it's to make sure that the board gets on review and hold their fiduciary duty to review the process implementation, keep it to concise context and performance, where else management take on the building of the team. So if, let's say, if you want to make sure that management gets the full support, budget allocation, resource to do all the deep diving, planning, chief sustainability officer, that would be helpful. Because by the time it reached to the board, they have gone through a rigor process implementation, so that the board doesn't have to go through the pain to start advising management, this is step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. So we do see that given the current landscape, most board will come together, they will go on this journey together, but they will tactically identify someone at the board who is interested to lead this, give that person a support to oversee, but all board will come together to do a shared role of responsibility. And two common ones we see that are important is risk and opportunity. So risk committee chair will typically handle the risk side. But the opportunity is the one that we are seeing lacking, because whether the business side, someone is taking that ownership on opportunities, navigating what's money on the table on future, is there a transformation needed for the organization? That's where that big conversation needs to happen. Yes. Okay, so if you are able to pull out or call out this within the strategy and call out this within the risk, you are in a better position to not reinvent the wheel, but reinforce the intention of the wheel.
One question here is I think that one of the board oversight is to ensure the quality of disclosure, climate change disclosure is sufficient. You look at page 18, the quality so far is not quite very clear. I suppose this is partly to the fact that some of the data are not really available because this climate change is muting. For example, you want to know the total frequency of flood in certain states, for example, and how would that affect our business. In the absence of information and data, comprehensive data, for example, how do then the board then put on a benchmark? Because it is part of our oversight function to ensure that sufficient disclosure on climate change is made by the management. But we need also to have some guidance on that. In the absence of data, what is the next available information that we should rely on as our benchmarking, as part of our benchmarking exercises?
Yep. That's a very good question. Data quality is an issue. So the common things when board actually asks, how fast can we get a baseline on scope 1, scope 2, scope 3? That's typically the question. Management needs to come back with an answer. Can I get it done in 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months to do a baseline? So baseline data is important. It may not be accurate, but at least scope 2 should be fairly accurate from your T&B bills. 12 months T&B bills, if you can't get that right, also is a yeah. So scope 1 and scope 2, the fact that it's a direct emissions, you should be able to get scope 1, scope 2, even if it's done internally. Scope 3 is the challenging one. If you were to get support externally, within 3 to 6 months, you should be able to get your baseline data for scope 3, even with proxy data calculation for any sectors that you are in. The only challenge is the intention is not to grind the data, but to look at the analytics, as you mentioned, from a sector and peer comparative. With that data, what is the strategy that you need to think about next? So once you have that baseline data, the next part is really to think about whether would management move towards scenario and target setting, and also internal carbon pricing to look at the potential impact. Then the board will say, okay, now you've done this, good and fine. If I were to look at from now to 2030 to 2040 to 2050, with my business plan approved, what would the emission look like 2030, 2040, and 2050? So they will start to say that, give me the answer to that. I may not need to know how you come up with the nitty-gritty detail, but I want to know if management have started monitoring that direction. So when it comes to the data, it's a critical challenge. In our conversation with regulator, we have since 3 years ago, we've put forth to government, please have an open data source on emission scope 1 and scope 2. Even if we don't have scope 3, fine. Because in Australia, the government has made available scope 1 and scope 2 data, regardless whether you're listed, non-listed. So it helps all organizations to easily calculate scope 3. Banks can calculate scope 3 finance emission as well. Now, we don't have that equivalent, but we have put forth for government and likely MOF to address that as well. So this is where, if no one is willing to share data, To ask whether is the data available is painful, no. Scope 2 is TNB bills, right? So even if TNB cannot disclose, Suruhan Jaya Tenaga have the data. So it's a matter of organization putting together their consolidated number. So based on that, I don't think it's, the data is not there. It's a matter of having a coordinated, efficient platform so that everyone can manage this. So for board, yeah, Dr. Gary, you want to share?
No, actually, no. I just wanted to say, because we are recording this, if you ask your question, could you please use the microphone in the seat beside you underneath the handrest? So the armrest, if you lift it up, there should be a microphone underneath there. If you can pull it out and use it during the Q&A, would really help. Thank you so much. Sorry.
Hopefully that gives you some view. You know, you may not have the perfect, but at least you know some data you can kickstart to make sure that there is assurance. So if we go on, so any other question? Yes.
Hi.
Hi, morning.
Hi, Arina, I'm Chit from Berjaya. I'm not speaking from my company, but I'm just putting out a point on baseline. Okay, it's likely that our baseline will for financial year 2023, but we also like to achieve what you call the goal where to achieve 45% reduction by 2030. Mathematically, we need to reduce it by 15% per year between now and 2030. So, but then being the first year, we look at baseline and with the objective to encourage the team, the working committee. So we accede to 5% reduction for year one, that is for FY 2024. So my question is, can we still state in our coming sustainable statement saying that we intend to halve emission by 45%, or reduce by 45% by 2030? I mean, we start small, 5%. Can we make a statement saying, well, we get to 45% reduction by 2030? Is it misleading or is it okay?
The first question is whether when you put that statement, is it scope 1, scope 2, or plus scope 3?
Scope 1 and 2 plus 2 categories in scope 3.
Okay.
The compulsory one.
Because for organization to get towards reduction on scope 1, scope 2 is not difficult. You can either go for RE, energy efficiency, or virtual power purchase agreement, but it requires a lot of discussion and negotiation. Some more advanced one, they will go for nature-based solution and kickstart the carbon credit reforestation projects. Whereas for scope 3, it requires you almost to have a very clear what's your strategy on supply chain. So if within your announcement, you don't have a target of supply chain, you have a high risk of not committing what you plan to do. So if you want to announce a effective scope 3 reduction, like EY, when we announced, we had 7 strategy. 1 or 2 of the key strategy, one is we have signed 2 virtual power purchase agreement, and we actually contribute more RE to the grid than what we consume. Second is we set 75% of our supplier need to set target on science-based target. Now, it's a very tall order to force 75% of our supplier to go towards science-based target emission reduction, but that was our commitment for scope 3 if we are taking it seriously. So for us, we have hit carbon neutral since I think 2021. We have hit carbon negative we hit carbon neutral 2020. We went to carbon negative 2021, but we want science-based by 2025. So in order to do that, we actually need to set strategy on supply chain. And we need to force our supplier to go through that journey as well. So credibility is how you have the action. If you have virtual power purchase agreement, you got RE, you got EE, you got supplier, and you have financing, 5 things you have are quite good. If 5 are missing, then something is challenging. Hopefully that helps. Okay, Ken. Any other question? Okay, so the next part is we're going to talk about strategy. Although the questions have come out on strategy, so maybe we can, no, we're not going to skip. Okay, so when it comes to strategy, what the TCFD report takes us to require is number 1, describe the risk and opportunity. And where organizations typically don't do well, first is they will have short term, they don't have medium term, they don't have long term. And when you talk about climate related risks, they have emissions or they have the transition risk, but they don't have physical risk. So in Malaysia, it's very common. Not many organizations have put out a physical risk impact report yet. We have one example, we'll share it shortly. The second part is describe the impact of climate-related risks and opportunities on the business strategy and financial planning. So they will ask, when you identify impact, what's the methodology and the process used? What are the lines of business impacted? So within your organization, you understand the line, where is it impacted, reflecting holistic interdependent nature among climate change related factors. So they are even asking within your group, which part, which location, where. So you have to go down to the granularity of detail. Now in terms of managing after you've identified, they also ask, now once you have understand, how are you managing it? What are the link between risks and opportunities to your business and your strategy? Now at the bottom is where it gets more challenging, because they say after you say you're good in identifying and managing, okay, never mind. Tell me how resilient if any of this risk materialize. What are the different scenarios under 1.5, 2, 4 degrees? What's the value impact, value at risk to your portfolio? So they want a specific number. Is it 5%, 10%, 20% under scenario A, B, and C? So they want to know that specific number. So that is actually talking about the end game and the resilience of the organization. Now if we go on to the next, and this is where we like to show baseline, advance. So when it comes to the baseline, typical horizon, as I mentioned, short is 0 to 1 year, medium is 1 to 5 years, and long term is 5 years to 40 years. And all of you can almost imagine the 40 years is 2050 net zero timeline target. They also want to understand, when you forecast, have you settled on why you are choosing some of this time frame, and why is the time frame reasonable to you? Are you going on aggressive by 2030, or are you going for non-aggressive now? You are slow by 2030, 2050, you only go aggressive towards 2040 and 2050. That is exactly what they are actually asking. And then when it comes to the opportunities, they also want to know what is the materiality assessment process that you take through, and how do you reference industry recognized framework? Do you look at industry sector as a benchmark? How many industry peers that you benchmark? How well are you compared to your competitors? Now advanced consideration is they will start to show detailed milestone, progress, and quantify business impact. So for operations that already have groups that already have operations in Singapore, they need to know Singapore got carbon tax 2019. It's already 4 years. So what was the impact to the business? And have you used the Singapore case to populate when it comes to the other scenarios? So that is typically the most direct questions that organization can ask. And then they will also talk about, when you talk about risk and opportunity, they will say that how does it go by business segment, geographical location. So it goes down to, again, the granular detail. Similar to your financial consolidation, they want that level of rigor as well. Doesn't mean 5% you have to check everything, but they want to know at least have you started to look at maybe 50% going towards 70% of your operation. So the key thing is when it comes to opportunity, business strategy, the baseline, they will have operational level of footprint. They will also have the business segment, whether financing, revenue, or balance sheet percentage of portfolio. And managing impact, they will have those using time frame on revenue, net interest income, and non-interest income. And they will understand what's the progress when it comes to execution of your strategy. Now, in terms of advance, this is where, when it comes to impact, they will want the amount in dollar sign, the risk-weighted assets by sector or portfolio. And same, the dollar and the percentage of finance emission. And when it comes to managing impact, they will want to know what is the enhanced outcome-based analysis to quantify environment and social impact. So it's not just environment and climate anymore. They also want to know how these impact the social aspects of the organization. So it gets more connected over time. So if we look on to the next part in terms of the baseline and advanced consideration for strategy, baseline, they will have 3 types of scenarios. So organization will start to ask, do I look at 1 scenario, 2 scenario, or 3 scenario? So most will start to have 1.5, and the extreme is 4 degrees. Some will have a 2 degrees. So a very common one is to have 3 scenarios. And then they will give a scenario, whether is it in-house, whether the scenario was developed based on industry collaboration, or is it vendor help me to develop that scenario. And they will talk about where do I source a scenario, whether do I refer to IEA, do I refer to NGFS. So what are the sources of international benchmark when I develop scenario? What are the assumptions as well as the methodology? And they will think about the firm-specific overlay, limitation, and adjustment. So it's not something I just plug and then this is my scenario. Doesn't work that way. You need to customize and show this is your business, this is your emission model and your scenario. Advanced consideration, they will then go by sector, geography, by every year end, and they will say that as a result, what is your investment scenario analysis? And 4-degree scenario investment analysis means worst case scenario. Imagine the best case scenario is 1.5 degree net zero, worst case is 4 degrees. Where is your investment scenario analysis? So they want to know where you're going to put your money at then, given that the worst scenario may happen. And they also want to talk about what are the disruptive, non-linear scenario, correlation to climate risk, variables to macroeconomic variables. So on the resilience strategy, the basic one is they will have basic operational resilience strategy. If flood happen, my shops all still can jalan. Then they will have the basic climate-based stress test scenario. My financial also still can jalan even though flood happen. And then they will say that commitment, and every year I have a report card. And they will talk about I have a resilience. Now the advanced consideration on resilience, they will say that what is your consideration of your customer and client resilience in your scenario? So it goes beyond. Means even though you can jalan, your customer cannot jalan. So that's the second part. And they talk about in terms of your community, where you are operating through your stress scenario. So even you can jalan, your community cannot jalan, you have issue. The third one is, what is your specific on sector resilience? Does your sector have a certain level of resilience? So we know if you are in the transportation, like shipping, and air transportation, you have the ICAO and the IMO monitoring emission, thinking about setting levy already for a very long time. But as I mentioned, if you look at Malaysia, property and construction still don't monitor emissions, not a requirement. This has been highlighted to government as well, so to a certain extent, government needs to address it. And the last one is portfolio performance under the selected scenarios. So it gives you a view of what we are seeing. Now, if we go on to the next slide, example. So who has looked at some example? We have on the left-hand side, this is TMB Sustainability Report 2022, whereby they have already identified transition risks at the one with the 4 red dots, the introduction of carbon pricing emissions, carbon pricing mechanisms on carbon emissions. So to them, they understand that there is an impact and it will be an decrease in revenue. So what they look at is also what are their risks when it comes to the energy transition to start the modeling. At the bottom, you will see that there are 4 scenarios that they look at. Business as usual at more than 4 degrees. Limited mitigation, 2.6 degrees. Moderate and strong mitigation, 2 to 3 degrees. Aggressive, 1.5 to 2 degrees. So 4 scenarios TMB is actually monitoring. Now on this part, here is where they talk about physical risks. And based on the physical risks, they have looked at 3 power plant and 100 substation on the physical risks. So they looked at how under the different scenarios, the number of plants exposed to flood by 2100, not 2050, 2100. So they look at hydro plants in Perak, Kelantan, Pahang, and coastal. They look at thermal plants in Kelang and the coastal areas and substations as well. So this is to a certain extent, they have to analyze how many will be affected by coastal inundation and flood from now 2022, 2050 to 100. So these are actually the high-risk locations. So it doesn't mean that everyone has to look at everything. So they have to kickstart with where the highest risk will be first as a start. So now with that, we also come to the leading disclosure example of today. Doesn't mean tomorrow they'll be leading, right? But today we see, for example, another one. what we are looking at is, in terms of Shell, they have established a guide of divestment and drive towards the net zero energy business by 2050. So not only they are under pressure, they have to put in a divestment strategy. And they are required to meet carbon performance standards or industry benchmark. No choice. So to a certain extent, this is the example that they have to step up into their program. Now the next part is, if we look at the next local that we have, IJM. So they have developed, this is on their 2023 annual report, IJM have developed a climate assessment to identify the transition and physical risks using multiple IPCC scenarios, and they have identified acute and chronic physical risk events were found to significantly affect some of the assets within geographic locations. So they've gone to specific geographic locations. And to a certain extent, they also say that in the long term, they will look at coastal flooding, considering such as Penang and Johor, under the SSP2 4.5 scenario. So these are the considerations that they will go down to the granular detail. Now, it gives you a view that some of the organizations in the local corporate Malaysia have started looking at this in a more tactical manner. So if we look at the next part, in terms of resilience, this is where we look at Equinor, an international energy group, whereby they use IEA, WEO oil pricing and carbon pricing scenario in their scenario analysis to stress or analyze the robustness of their portfolio. So to them, they would see that different oil price would result in different scenarios that they need to monitor. So they have a carbon cost relative to base assumptions based on these scenarios, and they actually have to demonstrate the resilience. The other good one I've seen is like Duke Energy, whereby they show under different scenario, if prices of commodity change, this is the impact directly to your tariff, household, and industrial, immediately under different scenario. So everyone is informed of how tariffs is affected by commodity prices. So with that, we've completed the third part. This is the final session. I hope everyone can still follow. Okay? So any question so far? Strategy, very easy. Tomorrow can do.
Well, I think a strategy, if I may ask a question.
Sure.
You know, you talk about the different temperatures. I was talking to some people in climate, and it says if it goes to 3 degrees, we're an extinction event.
We are.
Would you actually agree with that? There's no point talking 4 degrees. We're all dead. So strategy is meaningless. I think, you know, you talk about, even with TNB talking about sustainability, 43% of their power is produced with coal. How can they transition in a meaningful way to new energy sources? What kind of power station have we got in mind that would help them address that? I don't think they have a solution. I mean, we've discussed it at length internally, and we think that the only way forward, we've got to bite the bullet and do a big pivot to nuclear.
Correct. I wouldn't. Sorry.
Use the N word, you know? I think it's something, I mean, Dr. Gary, I spoke to Dr. Gary about this before, and he's in agreement with me, I think, about the fact that we need to start addressing the need for nuclear, because if we don't, I think the end of humanity is quite clearly in front of us. So, you know, all this thing about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 is just absolutely a waste of time. We can't control what happens in India. I mean, someone said that the future of climate change is not going to be determined by the West or Americas with all their fancy systems. India and China are going to determine that with their huge population bases. Whether they adopt it and do something about it, we're powerless. What impact does Malaysia have? What, 0.1% on CO2 emissions? You know, we're just a meaningless statistic in the global CO2 landscape. I know we're doing all this because it's things we have to do to comply with global standards. But we have to be mindful of the fact that we are in a much more dangerous space than we think we are.
Agree. Thank you very much for that comment. I echo that globally, in the discussion of net zero, not just for utility, but globally, nuclear has always been already deployed, but the discussion is very much on small, medium reactors. Because quite a number of countries are pivoting towards a more safe and effective way of energy transition. But we do know that it requires a lot of political consideration, as well as there are power sources that we need to think about. For example, CLP, they get their nuclear from China. So it comes back to where are we sourcing and in some of these considerations as well. So it's not so simple and direct, but what we can do in the interim from now to kickstart that discussion. In Malaysia, it's not new. Before Fukushima, we already have assembled a group of expertise back then to learn on some of these nuclear. Those talents still resides, but almost retiring. So we, so it is a journey that you know we have to think about as we go through. But we have still a lot of room for RE, enhancing our grid, having the large-scale battery storage, or considering interim aggregator model. So these are actually few things that can be done as we transition. No one has an immediate answer or switch to transition at this point, but at least everyone is piloting like hydrogen, and they are looking at co-firing of methane. So there is a certain things they have to pivot towards, and waste to energy, if that's even something that we are able to get our discipline on. Okay, so if no further question, the last segment. So stay with me, there's only a few slides left, okay? So when it comes to the recommendation on risk management, sorry, after risk is matrix, 2 more, very fast, don't worry. Okay, so on risk management, what we are looking is the process to identify, second is the process to manage, and the third is the overall integration to risk management, your ERM engine. So when we look at what we are seeing, Iberdrola, they have transitioned. I'll encourage you to look at Iberdrola's transition over the past 20 years. They've transitioned from brown to very green energy. Of course, you'll say by no choice, it's a market and policy factor, but it's good to see how they have deployed their transition, and we don't need 20 years to transition. Lesson learned. So when we look at it, is they have developed and supplemented their risk management by integrating climate change as a key management and corporate governance element. So they put that in the fore and the center of governance as a start. And even if we look at the advanced consideration, they have description of internal taxonomy to apply brown to green scale by business segment. So different business segments have a brown to green strategy, and different timeline customized to whether they can transform when it comes to the generation, grid, or at least the retail. They have a different timeline and direction on strategy. So when we look at the next one is Equinor. Equinor lists out their climate ambition and targets in terms of their timeline and their roadmap. They provide what's most important, training, to their employee program. And they put there very specifically under C, the details of training and employee readiness, planning and program, recognizing that it cannot sit just at C-suite level or board level. So they have to enable the whole of organization to deploy. So from here, since 2020 to 2021, they offer reskill and scale program, and they also have a new discipline to reskill and look at a 6-month mentoring and training program to make sure they transition so there's no potential stranded workforce. So if your organization have things like potential stranded workforce, banking has, utility energy also has, what are the reskilling alternatives? It is very difficult, but there is a discipline, at least we've seen some company trying to navigate that transition. If not otherwise, it will be a VSS 0.2 again. So the next part is we look at the part here in terms of leading example. This is one thing as well, Maybank. So what Maybank has put out is they've aligned policy with efforts with their control framework and risk management with external factors. So on top of their risk management, they start to pull in what are the externalities that affect their risk management processes, and they specify out in the respective area, how do they take external monitoring mechanism to enhance their risk management. And underneath it, they also specify it is a continuous cycle to monitor, improve, and complete the action based on performance of projects and assets. So every time they embark on some of these, there is a report card that they have to monitor. So what is the advanced consideration? 2 points in the green bubble is policy that restrict or divest from exposure in high-risk sectors, which is in line with 2 degrees or below scenario. This is a very common moving forward for financial institutions, insurance, and asset management. Second is environmental risk management is conducted for new transactions. We have seen the likes of Petronas Chemical over the 4 years ago have mentioned that they use internal carbon pricing for their due diligence on any new projects or acquisitions. So it's the same thing as if you're going for new projects, there's a certain due diligence that they need to look whenever they hit some of these areas. So the last part we have is matrix and targets. Under matrix and targets, there is the matrix, scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions is a specific call out, and the last one is setting targets. So underneath the matrix, they talk about listing the description, and under matrix, it can be everything else, water, waste, energy. These are the various matrix. But there's a specific call out on scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 in terms of the emissions. So they ask for emission data, the methodologies used, whether you're using greenhouse gas protocol or you use PCAF standards for financial information. So they also ask to have a consistent use of absolute or relative intensity matrix to enable understanding of targets based on industry-specific greenhouse gas efficiency ratio where possible. So some board will start to see that, okay, not only I look at absolute emission, what's the real emission, I also look at relative intensity. So the discussion is whether your intensity is over your revenue or over your property development, size of your development, or over other metrics like volume of production. So different organizations need to decide which are the common benchmark that you will look at when it comes to monitoring absolute and intensity. Intensity is because most of the time, I still need to grow my business. If my business is planned to grow another 10-20%, my absolute emission will grow up. So I need the intensity to tell me navigate. Even though I'm doubling or tripling my business, my emissions is getting lesser and lesser because I'm choosing better and better. So that's the prioritization to think about when you are transforming or at least navigating the business. So the next part is also having a risk to the largest source of greenhouse gas emission. What oversight would mean is, out of all your baseline, which are the top 5 areas that you have the highest emission? Is it from your energy? Is it from your waste? Is it from your use of transportation? So these are the 3 things that you will then start to think about. Sizing up where it's most material. Now, once we understand that, we think about target setting. The idea is the 80-20 rule. If you set target on the most important, then you've taken care 80% of the high-risk areas. So you think about what are the targets pertinent to these risks and opportunities, whether on absolute or intensity, and the link between remuneration and specific target. So the example we have here is NL, and what we see is they have set key metrics across multiple investment, remuneration, operational emissions, and they put it as an overall drive to transition in their decarbonization. And what they do is also, under the matrix, baseline is you can see, they can put percentage of portfolio, percentage of capital commitment. These are options you can choose. The alignment is what's your percentage expenditure to specific low carbon R&D. Now we have worked with one of the listed subsidiary PLC, whereby they said, if I were to invest 10 million to look at new business opportunity, I will want to make sure that the return is 2 to 3 folds, but it has improvement on my emission reduction by X amount as well. And typically these are navigating to actually validate or invalidate capital flow moving forward. And most of the time, it is on digital and technology area. So they actually start to set some of these funding as a pathfinder. Similar to, you see, organizations have started to build up a green engine arm or a So in terms of the water consumption and waste, that's the next akan datang. Because typically the water and waste, although water is still cheap, but Nick Nasmi has announced they're going to increase tariff and has gone around to socialize. Quite a number in terms of the energy. Even if carbon tax has not kicked us, in our discussion with all corporates and SMEs, look at the past 12 months, just look at energy bill, it has increased 30% to 200%. And by navigating that, you will understand if you manage energy efficiency, you will reduce energy consumption and you will reduce emission scope 2. So these are things that will be managed moving forward. So the next one is, in terms of example, we have Sime Darby Plantation. Now, they already, to a certain extent, give the category of emissions, land use change, effluent treatment, stationary combustion vehicles and fertilizers, and livestock, scope 1. Scope 2, T&B bills. Scope 3, the feedstock, non-palm supply, purchased goods and services, others, and they have the flag and non-flag. So they have looked at end to end from when they do the harvesting, replanting, all the way up to refining end to end. Now this is important because they embark on science-based target reduction. So they have to make sure that their baseline have already covered all the necessary emissions calculation, including scope 3. So they also provide a methodology that considers not just carbon emission, but methane, nitrox oxide, and also some of the equivalent based on the IPCC 6 assessment report. So there is a certain international consideration when they need to calculate some of these scope 3. So the idea is when it comes to the advanced consideration, there is a materiality assessment in deciding where are the large emitting factors. And they also will quantify for scope 2 emissions end to end. So the next one is they will need to start think about annual assurance for the key ones, as well as intensity ratio with unit by total revenue or potentially by employees or other denominator. So the last slide we have here today is on what are the example as well. So this is IJM. And where they put is position statement on science-based target given, whereby they are embarking. And they talk about what are the near-term, near-term, which is 4.2% reduction annually. Long-term, 90% on scope 1. Short-term is 4.2% reduction annually, 100% RE by 2030. And then long-term, 90% also by 2050. And for scope 3, 2.5% reduction near-term. And then in the long-term, 90% and 97 physical. 90% is absolute, 97% is physical and economic intensity reduction. So in the long-term target is to look at operational category 4, 5, and 6, and the embodied carbon to look at supply chain for low carbon plan by 2027, covering the remainder of 67% of scope 3 emission. So there is a certain level of clarity of where they are facing out their direction on science-based target. So this is actually all linked to science-based target timeline. So with that, I've completed my sharing session. Any question before I pass the floor back to Dr. Gary?
Arina, here. Hi, it's me again. Since we all know that the TCFD full disclosure is not due until FY 2025, 26, yep, calendar year 2026. So between now and then, the climate transitional plan, can you elaborate a bit on that? What are we to put?
Okay.
Thank you.
As we go through earlier, you're right. Under Bursa, the timeline to disclose or adopt TCFD aligned disclosure is 2025 for main market. For banks, is next year. Under the CRM SA requirement, by next year, bank, FIs, asset management, insurers have to start reporting TCFD. So bank is 1 year ahead. So if bank is 1 year ahead, means they are evaluating you 1 year ahead of your disclosure. If you like it or you don't like it. So to a certain extent, what we do see is very importantly for you to at least prepare for the high risk. Now, for organizations who have started exporting to EU, They are already faced with CBAM, 6 sectors: steel, aluminium, fertilizer, cement, hydrogen, electricity. So 1 month ago, those who have started exporting have already started reporting their emissions. 2026 is the tax when it's going to start. So in the past 3 to 6 months, some of the clients we've helped to do their internal carbon pricing already. And what are the options of what you call it, the abatement projects? Having an internal carbon pricing, and what are the abatement projects they can put in place to reduce emission moving forward based on today's pricing of the green projects. So these are things where if the organization is tactical, they will start by this year to put out their initiatives, their baseline, and the process governance that they already built up, the internal carbon pricing mechanism. So at least they will signal to stakeholders, investors, and customers, I have my process ready. I may not want to tell you what my internal carbon price is, but I already have something on. So this is where they want to be ahead of the bankers to at least signal that they are somewhat resilient, to make sure that banks are not pulling out capital or pulling out from their share price, selling their shares. So these are the things where I would say it's important to have that strategy lined up from now to next year to 2025. Not simple, but the examples we have today, I hope it has given everyone a view of what, today's landscape, who has put out what disclosure, and you roughly can see some sort of granularity or example to follow. Hopefully that helps you to answer. Otherwise, 2025.
Yeah, Arina, could we refer to the CDP framework as a guide for a transitional plan? Yeah.
You can. There are many guides. CDP is one. SASB is another one. If you want to look at sectorial focus area. Like I said, coming from the property and construction, although 40% emission globally, one of the hardest to decarbonize in Malaysia because of our setup. So unless the likes of radar put out a requirement that everyone has to monitor, report Scope 1, Scope 2, and they say that having just green building certification is not enough, they need a report card on every building, then we will hit somewhere. Haven't happened yet. I hope that gives a view. In US, even though there are discussion of change in political direction, some of the local states have already had real-time emission monitoring for green buildings because they have to pay tax. So in US, our tax team have green buildings sitting next to them to look at tax submission and energy management. Even though globally there's a hoo-ha on whether who's going to come back or not. Okay, so with that, I'll pass back to Dr. Gary if there's no further question. Thank you very much for listening.
Yes. So once again, join me in thanking Arina and her team who've come all this way and given us a very detailed walk through all of these key issues under the TCFD. We're going to change computers just a little bit for the slides. We would really appreciate your feedback on this session, especially since it's the last one for this year. We'd like to know whether it met your expectations, what other thoughts you might have, suggestions. Climate Governance Malaysia always open to ways to help work with our partners to keep bringing you this kind of material. We want it to continue to be meaningful and impactful moving forward. So if you, the moment we get the screen up there, there's another QR code. If you would be kind enough to scan it, there you go. And we really value your feedback. It might maybe save the link or star the link or something like that. Save it to your address book and maybe come back to it later and fill it out if you have trouble with the connection here in this building. So once again, it's been a great pleasure and honor to have you here. Hopefully, we'll see you again next year if we can continue this program. Once again, thank you very much on behalf of Climate Governance Malaysia and all our partners. We're always grateful for their support. And once again, a note of thanks to those working in the background. Once again, this is recorded. I think it will be made available also on CGM's website. We do have the obligatory photo session. How is this going to work? Okay, so apologies to all those who have sat behind for not wanting to come down. We need you to come down anyway, so we can take. Yeah, okay. So yeah, if you can occupy the first 3 to 4 rows. Yeah, the first 4 rows here.